Welcome to the DesignRush podcast. I'm your host, Bianca Mayer. We're joined by Robert Rose, a marketing expert and the host of the This Old Marketing podcast, which has over 3 million downloads in over 150 countries. We'll delve into what makes a podcast great in 2024. With over 5 million podcasts out there, we'll explore content promotion strategies using short videos on TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and Instagram Reels to grab audience attention.
Doing the press release, leveraging your network, leveraging your audience, yes, all good. But what I would suggest is that the promotion through social media really today has to be, how do you fragment your content across those social media channels so that the content can be consumed there.
We'll also explore the intimate nature of podcasting, as 43% of decision makers at B2B companies listen to podcasts for business-related content.
Podcasting is not the mechanism that's going to draw you Joe Rogan-sized crowds. It's just not. I don't care who you are, right? So what you have to understand is that podcast is basically a more intimate way to consistently communicate with a small, focused niche of your broader audience.
Finally, we'll discuss the importance of great production quality, not only to make a good first impression, but also to stop the scroll and grab the attention of your audience.
The hardest part that we see that clients struggle with launching podcasts is everybody goes, it's just turning on the camera and the microphone for 30 minutes every week and talking to somebody. It's like, no. It's you got to put the care and feeding into this thing, or your audience will know.
Remember to like and subscribe to stay updated with all of our future discussions with industry leaders. Let's get started. Robert, a very warm welcome to the DesignRush podcast again. It is amazing to have you here with us today.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm grateful to be here, for sure.
I want to shift the focus now to, talking more about podcasting, actually. I'd like to pick your brain about this, especially from a very selfish point of view, to be honest. Now, I know, Robert, that, you have this old marketing podcast that you run with Joe, right? And it's been running successfully for over a decade, and you guys have like millions of downloads now. So tell me, what strategies did you initially implement to grow your podcast audience, to where it is today?
So I'm going to answer that in two ways, because I think what we did 10 years ago doesn't work today. And so just as we've been talking about social media and where it is, I think the strategy to grow a podcast, if you're launching one today, is much different than it was 5, 6, even 10 years ago when Joe and I started. So when we started, it was all about using, so as well, as both Joe and I will say, it's way easier to launch a new podcast when you have an existing audience, right? So one of the things that we found really successful was to leverage the audiences that we already had access to. In other words, leveraging our email lists, leveraging our client lists, leveraging the folks that we knew through our networks to be able to say, help us promote it. Sort of that, sort of the early days of sort of having your influencer friends sort of promote you for you. That groundswell was helped us get momentum for the very early days, and really focus in on, promoting it across social media. Both Joe and I had reasonably large audiences on Twitter and on LinkedIn, so that we could leverage those audiences to say, hey, come try it, come listen. And then, and of course we did a little bit of paid media in the early days to promote the idea. We did a press release. We did all the sort of requisite things that you would do in those days to sort of launch a new media product, right? So that's the way we looked at it. This was a new media product. We were also super clear on what we were trying to do there, which was, we knew that this was never going to be a lead generation thing. So we didn't want the show to actually be about, how-tos or practical, it was always going to be sort of a hot take news show. So we took advantage of that to really talk about, whether it's, controversial is not the right word, but at least provocative ideas, so that the promotion of those things would lead people to go, ooh, what did they, I want to hear what they said about that thing. That said, that worked fine. Today, if you were to ask me that same question, and you just did, so if you were to ask me that same question, I'd say doing it, doing the press release, leveraging your network, leveraging your audience, yes, all good. But what I would suggest is that the promotion through social media really today has to be, how do you fragment your content across those social media channels so that the content can be consumed there. And what I mean by that is, one of the things that I always advise my clients when they're launching a new podcast to do is to not think of it as a podcast, but to rather think of it as a show. And it's just a show that's going to find different distribution methods these days. One of them will be the podcast networks. Another, and Joe and I have been doing this over the last 6 months, is to transform it into a YouTube show and have it on TikTok and so clips, promotional ideas, and basically expanding the breadth of your distribution of elements of your podcast, sort of turn it into a multi-channel show. That's kind of how you have to build an audience these days, and not just think of it as something you're going to stick on Spotify or Apple.
Yeah, exactly. No, absolutely. I think that, and this is something that I wanted to get to later in the conversation as well. But for sure, I think video content along with that is absolutely, you can't avoid it. It's crucial to have that along with your podcast, isn't it? I mean, people are such visual creatures, and we're becoming more and more so as time goes on, that for sure, I think having some visual element, videos, people feel like they're there with you, ready to interact. It's an absolute must. I 100% agree with you. Robert, the one thing that I wanted to just quickly go back to what you mentioned before, you said leveraging the audience that you have now as a business running a podcast, right? Going to the people that are already part of your network. I do wonder though, does this not perhaps like limit what it is that you can talk about? Like, or is there a way to branch out the niches and the topics that you talk about? Like, let me take DesignRush as an example, right? We mainly focus on B2B agencies and such. But I do wonder, is it smart to still branch out with other topics? Say, for instance, us talking about AI and things like that. How do you meet those two things together?
I think in many regards, you kind of have to, right? I mean, you have to be able to branch out to something that is going to be different than what your competition is doing. And so, let's be honest, every agency out there now is either thinking of or has a podcast. I mean, there is just, it's a very popular topic and platform. And so the goal has to be, how do you turn yourself into a differentiated show? And sort of the core content is, it is critical to that, right? So what you're going to cover and the way that you're going to cover it. Now, of course, to your point, you provide these services, you do these things for these particular, clients, you do this, you do a very, particular set of services. So yes, theoretically it limits you, but if you start to widen out and say, who is the audience we are thinking of? And that's our audience. And what would align with our point of view of the world? Like what aligns with our, sort of the way that we believe the future of X is going to be, or what's going on in the world, or those kinds of things. Now your palette is opened up. Instead of saying, well, because we're an agency, we have to do a how-to show on marketing, right? You could do a show on, what's going on in AI, or what's going on in technology, or what's going on, what are the deeper, ramifications of the hiring people in 2024, and all, you could really open up your palette in terms of what it is you want to provide and the story that you want to tell. The key is that you have to feel like it's something that you're knowledgeable about and you want to talk about a lot and consistently and for a long period of time. And two, you have to feel like it's going to align with at least whatever part of the buyer's journey or customer journey you're trying to optimize, right? So one of the things that we didn't talk about is the fact that, look, these days you have to sort of set your realistic expectations. Podcasting is not the mechanism that's going to draw you Joe Rogan sized crowds. It's just not. I don't care who you are, right? So what you have to understand is that podcast is basically a more intimate way to consistently communicate with a small focused niche of your broader audience. And if you look at it like that, it becomes much more of an interesting play about what kind of content you want to talk about, because what you're doing is you're developing a deeper relationship with a subset of your broader audience. And that subset, so it might be that you're trying to draw more leads in. It might be that you're just trying to create a deeper relationship with your audience or some subset with your brand. That's, by the way, what Joe and I do. And so thinking about it in that way and going and not worrying about trying to get, 1 million downloads or trying to get, that level of audience, but saying, hey, of the thousands, let's say we get, boy, they love us. They're passionate about us. They listen to us every week. We're in their ear every single week with what we do. That's the goal, right? It's not to look at this like a big, broad, none of us are Joe Rogan. None of us are going to be, NPR. None of us are going to have those level of audiences, especially in the B2B world.
Especially in the B2B world. You're absolutely right. I really love what you just said. Honestly, it makes a lot of sense. At the end of the day, you really just want to carve out your little niche that you have and just go for it. And I mean, that also tends to grow, not like Joe Rogan size, but in your own space, right? And that's sort of the goal that I think most people are trying to strive for. Tell me, Robert, what specific steps did you really take to scale this old marketing to maintain relevance, over the years?
Well, we've always been a news show, so it's been a little easy. So there's two things that we started from the very beginning, which was one, we were going to cover the news. Joe and I were going to cover the news. So, I mean, look, we're not always lucky in that regard because there's not always a lot of news to talk about. But so, we struggle sometimes, but we've always got new material basically coming at us every week. That provided a limitation on us, of course, because one of the things that we have to be able to do is move very quickly. So, for example, I know a lot of very successful podcasts, interview style podcasts, for example, where you can do 3 or 4 a month and then not have to think about them again because they're sort of evergreen and you can sort of do a few in a week and sort of line yourself up with an editorial calendar, and that's great. With a news show, you can't do that. So we kind of have to dedicate time every single week to doing the show. So that's sort of the push and pull of the implications of the kind of things that you want to do. But the benefit was when we said, well, look, we're not going to do an interview show. We're going to do a show that is the news with just the two of us. It's going to be hot takes. It's going to be fun, snarky, sort of enjoyable, just sort of lean back sort of experience. Well, with no guests, we don't have to worry about scheduling guests, and we don't have to worry about worrying, their technical side of things and whether or not they can do things or not. And so that helped us sort of scale the show from a sense of, okay, it's just the two of us. All we have to figure out is every week and make a dedicated time to do this. And we've been relatively successful at doing that over the last 10 years. The second thing that I would mention is when you start thinking about the show, understand that it will change. Our show changes probably every 6 months. Like we change segments out. We, try new things. We try new structures. We try new, new ideas to bring stuff in and sort of look and see how it fits with the audience. And we'll ask the audience, did you like this? Did you not like this? So being able to be fluid with your, not getting so wrapped around the axle of your format that you go, this is the way it's always going to be. The show, if you go listen to something in 2014 or 2015, it's much, much different than it is today.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually did want to ask you this as well, Robert. I completely understand that, we need to be flexible, especially as content creators, as any kind. We all need to be flexible and adapt with, things that change, trends that are happening, or things that people are interested in, right? Because there's nothing that ever stays the same. But I do wonder, though, especially as someone that also creates podcasts myself, I do know that there are some things that we need to be consistent in. That means, the length of your podcast, the overall structure of the conversation that you have, something that audiences can really sink their teeth into and know, okay, this is good old faithful. I can come here for my education on whatever it is that I need to find. You build that sort of authority around that. So I'm just wondering if this does not challenge what you just said, and having to change and adapt constantly. So I just want to find out like very clear cut examples of where to stay the same and where you can actually be flexible with how
It's a great question. It's a great question, and one that we should definitely explore, because when we start to think about where we changed, and I'll get to that in just a second, you're 100% right that you need to set those expectations early and be consistent about it. If you start changing things up every week with the length of your show, with what you do, especially with the consistency of actually doing the show, boy, you will frustrate your audience. And we have, I have data proof of that, right? When we took, so we built up a relatively large audience over the course of 6 years as we started our podcast in 2013. And by 2018, we were humming. We were just basically, we were running on all 8 cylinders, right? We were just, chugging right along. And then Joe decided, and I'm blaming him a little bit, but he decided he was going to take a sabbatical. He had sold Content Marketing Institute, and he decided he was going to take a year-long sabbatical. And we talked about it. We said, well, do we want to end the show? And we said, well, we could go dormant. We could sort of stop doing it for a while and just sort of, not tell anybody. And then I said, you know what? No, the audience, if we say we're ending and we decide to come back, the audience won't be mad at us because we will have been honest and truthful with them and set that expectation. If we just say, hey, we're going to take a break, and then we decide not to come back, it would be bad for both of us, right? So we ended the show. We actually had a finale. We had a, big to do and made, poetry and tears and the whole thing. And we ended it. And then we went away for a little more than a year and came back and said, hey, we're back. Joe is done. We wanted to come back. We're so excited about coming back. And we lost about 40% of our audience in that time frame. Now that's good. You might say, well, wow, 60% of it stuck around because they never deleted you out of their phone or whatever. But the point is that we took a huge dip, and it's been a slog to try and get back to where we were in 2018. And so that's the first lesson, is that if you start skipping a week because we just don't have time this week, or this month we're going to take a hiatus, and you don't set that expectation with what they're going to get, the way they're going to get it, you can expect bad things to happen, because you are literally a swipe away from getting replaced with another podcast in your, in their feed. To follow that up, I would say we always kept the promise of an hour long ish. We typically go a little over an hour just because we can't shut up. But basically an hour long of us talking about the news, ranting and raving about something that's in the news that week. That's never changed from day one. That's the one thing that has stayed consistent the whole time. What has changed is we've tried new segments. Like we now do for what we call the winners and losers segment before we do our rants and raves, which is an example of someone who's won in marketing this week and someone who's lost in marketing this week. And so when we do our winners and losers, that's a new segment for us. Same basic content, us ranting and raving about stuff, but segmenting it into something that people start to expect and enjoy. Like, ooh, who's going to be the winner this week? What's going to be the loser this week? So that's the places you can play in the format. I would not play with length. I would not play with, the sort of thesis or backbone of the show, just to your point, because people want to get in and be comfortable every single week.
Yeah, exactly. I also know that there are a lot of podcasts that tend to cover a bunch of different topics in one segment, right? And I want to ask you, especially for a podcast that you go to, I've had this experience myself, because we all go to the school of YouTube at least at some points in our lives, right? And we go to learn stuff, and oftentimes these days you listen to podcasts to learn things. um, and I've often gone to videos or even blogs or any type of content where I'm trying to learn something, and there's just too much, pushed into one episode. And I just wonder, do you think this is a good strategy to try and cover a bunch of things? Or do you think it's better that, we as podcasters just go all in into one specific topic and really deep dive into that?
Yeah, I think that's a hard question to answer empirically, right? So what I would say is that what we typically see are that podcasts that are really successful tend to focus in on a few things and go deep, right? Every, whatever their cadence is, whether it's once a month, once a week, once a day, whatever that thing is, they tend to sort of go, try and get to some level of originality and insight, right? Where there is, it's not just a blitz of headlines, or it's not just a blitz of various topics and sort of, 30-second takes on a bunch of topics, rather than sort of meaningful discussions, right? So for example, Joe and I cover probably 3 to 4 news items in an hour, right? So we're going relatively deep in discussion. Sometimes it'll be 2, right? Because we're talking about something big. And so, but at the same time, I don't want to just discount that completely, because I am sure somebody can point to somebody who's really successful that does exactly that does the 30-second sort of fast take of, 100 news items, or the quick takes on this, or lightning round of that, and all those kinds of things. Those are the shows. I'm with you. Those shows interest me less than the ones that go deep. But what I would suggest is that if it works for you, if it works for your audience, then it works. I'm not here to tell you what the right template is. It's just, you got to find what works for you. But I tend to side with you on this.
Yeah. Do you think that it's a case of, you can build your podcast and they will come regardless of how you build it? You'll always sort of just find your niche anyway?
Let's just be honest. It's really hard to launch a podcast these days, because there's just so many out there. And there's a fantastic statistic, I can't remember where it comes from, that says that, I'm going to get this stat a little bit wrong, but forgive me for that. But the general trend is true. It's like 90% of all podcasts have less than 5 episodes. It's because
it's 3.
There's, so when, 3, is it 3? Okay. So yeah.
3.
So it's 3 episodes, right? So, which means there's a ton of podcasts out there, but there are so few that actually stick with it. And it takes time. You will not, I don't care who you are, your first podcast episode is going to get like 4 listens, right? And so you have to stick with it. It's a marathon here. You are building the brand of a show, and you are piercing the noise that is out there. And once you get to episode 12, 13, 20, 50, right? Now you can start looking and going, hey, how are we doing? Are we adding new listeners? Are we not adding new listeners? And all those kinds of things. So then it gets to, okay, we have to actually think about marketing this, right? We have to actually think about marketing this as a key component of what it is we do. Yes, it should get a front page link on your website. Yes, it should get a press release. Yes, it should get, but feel free to not do that when there's 2 listeners. Feel free to start promoting it after you've got some, you've got some road wear on those tires, right? You've got the kinks worked out. You've got the bugs worked out. You're starting to get a little momentum organically, and you feel like now's the time to step on the gas and start to really build an audience. It's okay to use those first 10 episodes as a work, to figure it out, figure out what where your muscle is, figure out what you're doing. That's okay. Because it doesn't matter. You're going to be there anyway. So you might as well use it to work out and get good at it.
Absolutely. I have to say, we're almost at 50 episodes now, which when you think about it, it sounds like a lot, but actually it isn't a lot at all. It's actually a very small margin. And we're learning as we go constantly with what's working, checking out the analytics, those kinds of things, like really making sure, like, okay, this is working. And I think that analytics especially work so well these days that you can actually see when your audience checks out and they're not interested anymore. So you can kind of refine that, I think your first, I don't know, we're not at 100 episodes yet, but I feel this might be a bold statement, but I think your first 100 episodes is where you really have the luxury of refining where it is that you want to go. What works, what doesn't work? What do we need to change? What do we need to stick to?
We refined. Our first refinement came at episode like 40, where we decided, okay, here's some things that are working and here's some things that aren't working. That's when we decided to sort of switch up some stuff. And then the next refinement probably came at episode 120 or something like that, right? It was, we stuck with it for a while. And then the next refinement may have come at like episode 180 or 190, right? So about every 50 or so episodes, we would change up what we're doing, because so you figure 50 episodes, it's roughly once a year we're making, we're making a change, because we're a weekly show. So, we're and we're on episode 429, I think now. So, so that shows you, you learn a lot. You learn a lot.
Yeah, of course you do. Okay, now Robert, I just want to get back to some of the other questions that I did want to ask you about podcasting. How would you say aspiring podcasters can really assure that their content is highest quality and stay consistent within their marketing?
Well, one, I would invest in the equipment. I mean, if you mean quality by, sort of the actual production value, is if you're going to do this, do it well, right? And so, invest in the right microphone, invest in good cameras, invest in, a high quality production. I don't care what people say about it can be shot on an iPhone and it's okay. Nope. I absolutely don't believe that. I absolutely believe that beautiful matters, careful production matters. Great sound quality is absolutely the number one thing. It has to sound good. And if you're on your, regular laptop microphone and you're doing this thing on Zoom, it's just going to sound like crap. It's just not going to be good, and people will not tune in. And then the second thing is maybe where you were going with this, which is how do you ensure that it's consistently great quality, like high, like you're digging deep for great creativity. If you start to think of it like a show where it's got, and it's funny, we actually have, I wrote it out, right? A template for every script, right? So each segment we do, it sounds very off the cuff, but we plan and we program every show with care. Like, so I spend a good few hours every single week thinking through. I don't just throw a bunch of news stories in there and go, let's talk about it. I actually think about, well, what's the theme, or how are they connected to each other? What's the discussion going to be? Where is Joe's rant and rave going to fit into the whole, and so you program and you think about what it is you want to talk about, and you're not afraid to actually lose the stuff. And this is especially true if you're a podcast that interviews guests. You're not afraid to put them in the can if they're not good, right? Because that one of the challenges with having guests, and I hope I'm not indicative of this for this show, but one of the challenges is, and I'm sure you've encountered this over your 50 episodes, they're not always great, right? You don't always get someone who's awesome on a podcast. They might be a particularly smart person or have lots of valuable things to say, but as soon as that go live green button goes on, they're like, then they freeze up, or they're not good, or they stumble with their words, or they're just not interesting. And so that you have to put that care and feeding into it every single week. And that's honestly the hardest part that we see that clients struggle with launching podcasts, is everybody goes, it's just turning on the camera and the microphone for 30 minutes every week and talking to somebody. It's like, no. It's you got to put the care and feeding into this thing, or your audience will know.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. I have to say, everything that we do, even, and I'm sure that many other podcasts that actually have a dedicated team to it, everything we do is meticulously structured, researched, looked at. Yes, obviously, when we hit that record button and we're sitting here and talking, we never really know where the conversation is going to go. You might have a set of questions or topic suggestions, laid out, but even with this one, for instance, you kind of go with where the conversation is flowing. It's still on topic, and you're still learning a lot of stuff, regardless of whether you've set up your questions exactly to be the way that it is. I think you need to have or allow a certain amount of flexibility to still have a nice, natural conversation with whoever you're talking to, right?
That's such an important point. It's really an important point, and because what we see, and this happens a lot in agencies, and the practitioners in the agencies in the audience here are going to smile at this, but so which is, your CEO or your creative director might not be the best host for your podcast, right? they mean well, and because they're the CEO or the head of creative or whatever it is, the head of strategy, whatever it is, it's like, it's obvious that they should be no, it's really not. It's really not obvious that they should be the host, right? So there is a certain level of self-awareness that you have to have when you're putting up a new show to say, yeah, there is a skill involved here that, yes, we may take 13 episodes to develop and get good at it. And this person is up for being coached, and this person is up for getting, the right education in terms of how to make themselves a good host, a good interviewer, for example, just to your point, to be able to improv and move off to side roads and all those kinds of things. But at a certain point, we have to go, yeah, no, we're going to get a professional host, or we're going to have somebody on the team who's really good at this, do this, and create a team for it, because it is that important.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. I do want to just quickly go back to one thing, and this was something that you mentioned earlier. You talked about having like really quality equipment, and I'm pretty sure a lot of our listeners that's going to be tuning into this is, going to want to start a podcast, and they want to know where to begin. And one of the big things is actually knowing what type of equipment to use, right? So, Robert, could you tell me what equipment it is exactly that you're using? Your camera, your mic, all of that stuff.
All right. Well, so my microphone here is what's known as the NPR mic. If you Google the NPR, like, when you hear any of their podcasts or any of their radio shows, and I've it's become a little bit of a funny thing. Saturday Night Live did a skit about NPR and the way that they sound, and all of that. So this is an Electro Voice. Happy to send you a link to that if that's helpful for your show notes. And it's an expensive microphone, I will tell you, but it is absolutely magnificent in terms of the sound quality and sort of how it blocks out external sound for that. It's so you're talking $300 or $400 to spend on a microphone. But if this is what you do for a living, this is where you spend your money. My camera is a DSLR camera that I've made into a webcam. So it's a Sony A6400, which, and then I have over the top of it where I'm looking right now, I'm actually looking into a teleprompter, which is what I use to put my script up for it's an Elgato teleprompter that fits right over the lens of the camera. So I can actually look directly into the camera lens, but also read a script if I have to, like an introduction to somebody or, something like that. And then I use a piece of software also by a company called Ecamm, which allows me to do different ways to do my camera, to zoom in, to zoom out, and basically, provide different lighting effects or those kinds of things. And then behind me, I just have, some lights to sort of provide a little bit of decor, and I can change that with my phone, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the standard Philips sort of, colored lighting kind of thing that you can get.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, that's exactly it though, is that there's so much that actually goes into it, right? And I think that having the right equipment, the things like having lighting or having, the quality of your image. It just comes down to first impressions, right? Say, for instance, someone's never seen you before and they've never seen your podcast before. This is your chance to really make a splash and be like, this is who I am. This is a bit of my personality. You can maybe see that in the background or whoever. And people kind of already have an idea of who it is that they're tuning into, right? And the vibe that they're getting from that.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. And at the top of the show, one of the things that we talked about was the sort of change in the media consumption on social media. And so if you start thinking about when you start promoting your podcast, one of the things that you'll do is pull clips. And those clips may become Instagram Reels, they may become TikTok videos, they may become short clips that you post on LinkedIn, whatever those things are. What you're trying to do is, let's be honest, you're trying to get people to stop scrolling. And if the thumbnail for that is something that looks like it was shot on an iPhone and, you've got sort of the blurred and then the vertical video and it just looks like another iPhone video shot, it's not going to go over really. It's not going to stop that scroll. But if it's beautiful, it's got a nice background, if it's got, if there's good lighting, if there's good sound, all those kinds of things, that's what's going to get people to stop scrolling. And then, of course, it's the content, of course, has to earn its keep. And interestingly, what we find is with that algorithm change, the fascinating thing, and we're still dealing with this, is something that we're still wrestling with, which is because every single post on social media of your clips have to earn their keep, right? So in other words, the thing that you did yesterday has no guarantee of being seen by the audience that sees your new clip today. One of the content changes that we've really noticed is you kind of have to set context every single time. And so if you think about it, one of the biggest challenges is in the middle of an hour-long show, and you're talking about, let's say, 5 or 6 topics, how do you set the context again for all of those clips? Sometimes it's really hard to do that, right? It's almost like, you've seen anybody who does a lot of video will know this, right? When you do an interview with a client or you do an interview with someone and basically there's someone off camera asking you the question, and what they want you to do is, well, let's repeat the question again as I answer it so that we can use the entirety of the clip without having to put text up or something like that. It's that idea, setting that context for what it is you're going to talk about. So it's almost a tell them what you're going to say, then say it and tell them what you sold them, right? So that in every single sort of thing, and that becomes a key piece of how you sort of manage that sort of linking and getting into the social media algorithm contextually.
That is a great tip, and we will definitely be following that.
It's hard. I will tell you, it's really hard. Yeah, it's really hard. Yeah. Especially if you're a show like us. So we go real time, right? We go, ostensibly, Joe and I record and then we hit publish and it goes live and then it's done, right? So it's really hard to do in real time. It's easier to do if you do an interview show and you can sort of cut it up and then add in some context. It's the equivalent of sort of, when you do the intro off, in post-production and then you bring it all together and cut it up. You can do some of that as well. So at the end of an interview, one of the things that I advise my clients to do if they do an interview show is at the end of the interview, you've probably taken a few notes, or you've probably noted a few things down. So the first thing is when the interview finishes, if you're the kind of show that does like one of those cold opens where it's like, there's a cold open where you start with a provocative statement from your guest and then boom, you go into your music and boom, you go into your show, which is a great way to do it, by the way, because 30 seconds is what you want on that YouTube video view so that you get the view and all of that. And so you do that cold open and you go, you answered this question so wonderfully, but I wonder if you could just do the 30-second version of it and sort of say this, right? And then have them give you a little extra behind the scenes footage that you can use to then cut it up. Joe and I can't do that, but if you're doing a guest show where you're editing stuff, you totally can.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good idea. And I'm probably going to take you up on that at some point, actually.
Yeah, well, as you can tell from this interview, guests tend to be a little long-winded. So what you want is that sort of cool sound bite for your show. Yeah.
Exactly. But I have to say, quite often, personally, I quite like having the guests just kind of speak their mind and I don't want to say like ramble on because that's not necessarily a good way to put it, but I think they're talking and there's something about like speaking to experts where their stream of consciousness is just kind of coming out, where even though it sounds like, okay, this is a lot to listen to, absolutely there are hordes of sound bites that you can take out of that, sort of
Totally.
stream of consciousness, as I said, and really, really listen to what was there. That's why I try not to interrupt too much when that does happen.
Yeah,
But
no,
yes,
it's a
absolutely. I
great
think
point as well. You don't
listening
want to
lots
be
of
sort of, that host that sort of, ends up talking over the entire time, and your guest is just sort of sitting there going doop 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 doop, and all that.
Okay, so Robert, I just have to ask you this, right? How has building this podcast with Joe really helped you to grow your overall brand and business over the years? Like, what has been the major benefits of this?
So we talked a little bit about this in a little while ago, but I think when I look back, as I mentioned, we never did the show to sort of draw in leads. For us, in the early days, I would say, it was all about awareness of content marketing. So we started the podcast to become this awareness mechanism for content marketing specifically, because of course that's what Content Marketing Institute was really all about. So we were trying to make everybody excited about content marketing through talking about the success stories and what was going on and where things were really happening and the pragmatic aspects of it. And then the idea was that it would drive traffic to Content Marketing Institute, and then they would sort of, convert into the different ways that we monetize those audiences. So that was the original goal. When we came back after hiatus, it changed, of course, because Joe was no longer with Content Marketing Institute, and I was much more focused on, my consulting and my own agency business. And so there it became like, well, a couple of things. One, we could be a little snarkier, right? We could exhibit a little more of because we weren't under the umbrella brand of Content Marketing Institute any longer. So we were sort of operating on our own. So we could be, could curse a little more. We could, do a little more stuff that's not natural to us. And we started to really focus in on two things. Joe really started to focus in on his opinions on the content creator side of things. And I started to really focus in on, what was going on in marketing. Like, here's the real scoop of what's going on in actual businesses with marketing. And you can see how that would fit both of our personal brands. And it was a nice match, right? I could play sort of bad cop to Joe's good cop, and he could play bad cop to my good cop, right? So it sets up a nice tension for us to talk about various news stories from those perspectives, with those lenses on. What that has done over the course of the last, call it 6 years since we've been back, is a deeper relationship with the audiences that we have. So where I'll talk to business benefit is I've gotten a few referrals for new clients from the audience. I've certainly gotten lots and lots of interaction and deeper relationships with those people that I care about, which are, the elements of the audience that, work back and forth. So it's, I guess, kind of a networking value if really it. The key benefit for the business has been visibility, right? For me, it's like keeping me front and center and getting me invites to come on podcasts like this, right? So when I get an invite to come on a show like this, where my audience is, in many ways, I get to sort of talk about, all the things that I'm passionate about and hopefully relay some value. And hopefully somebody goes, hey, that guy's smart. I want to bring him in for to talk to us a little bit. So speaking engagements, training, those kinds of things, I've seen some opportunities, but they're indirect because I get invited to be on I get those opportunities from being on other people's podcasts, but I'm on those people's podcasts because I have my own. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, of course. I mean, I think everybody does, or most people that do podcasting is doing it for visibility, right? Regardless of whether it's for a business or their personal brand, it's visibility, putting yourself out there at the end of the day. And I think, yeah, of course, there's a ton of benefits to doing that for sure. Otherwise, both of us wouldn't be doing it, right?
Right.
So,
That's right.
yeah, yeah.
Although I might
Um,
because I really do enjoy it. I really do enjoy it. So even if I had 0 listeners, I would probably still think about doing it because I like doing it so much. But regardless, yeah, it does have to also be productive.
no, 100%. I think it's nice to sort of be able to put your thoughts and stuff out there into the stratosphere or whatever you want to call it. And
Right.
sometimes you hear some echoes back, or sometimes not, some violent reactions to something you've said as well. But at the end of the day, I
Well,
think
that's
it
true.
builds a
Yeah.
community. And
I don't read the
yeah.
reviews. Let me put it that way. I don't ever read the reviews,
No,
good or
no,
bad.
we don't do that. No. Okay, so Robert, we are going to start wrapping up pretty soon now. Thank you so much for all of your insights on podcasting. I personally have learned a ton, and I'm sure that our listeners would definitely get some value from this conversation as well. Um, Now, as we start to wrap up, I just want to ask you a little bit more about how you guys are tackling outsourcing. Now, firstly, of course, my question is: have you or are you outsourcing agencies currently for things like content creation or branding or marketing or even just your visuals for the podcast?
Yes, we are. We outsource a good piece. So all that stuff that we talked about with the show, sort of pulling the clips, putting those, basically all of our social media on our, and that means I wouldn't call it content creation as much as transcreation, which is sort of the repurposing of the clips. There's we do a short version, sort of an 8, like 3, every episode gets 3 sort of 8 to 10 minute discussions, which goes on YouTube. So it's kind of a best of, if you will, of every episode. The long episode goes up on YouTube, as well as we probably do 5 or 6 clips, which have, graphics and fun things that fly in and all that kind of stuff for TikTok, for Reels, for YouTube Shorts, etc. And all of that production, we have. It's not an agency as much as it is just 3 separate. I mean, they have their agencies, but they're freelancers. Probably better term for them. But our clients are doing a lot of outsourcing for podcast production, podcast management, podcast script writing, all of those kinds of things, and all their they're sort of using it as sort of an outsourced production hub, and then they just show up and make recordings with guests, and then they ship it all off to this agency that will actually handle it. So yeah, we use it for all of our social media needs.
Amazing. Tell me, what was or is your best practices for getting these outsourced agencies or freelancers, as you say, to handle these tasks? I mean, what are the things that you specifically look for in trusting someone else or another entity to handle these very personal things? Actually, when it comes to your social media and your overall visuals, that is a personal thing for your brand, right? So how do you really go about selecting the best?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, certainly I recognize the absolute value, and you didn't tee me up for this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I recognize the value of a third party sort of way of looking at things, like a DesignRush, right? To be able to say, these are vetted. These are people who actually know what they're doing. And so they take their business seriously, and they're not just hacks at what they do, but they actually not only take the time to sign up and get involved with DesignRush, but then DesignRush takes the time to do those things. But that really speaks to a larger idea, which is, look, I'm inside baseball, right? So I've been a marketer for 30 years. And so, the networks that I've built up over the last, call it, 20 years of my existence, you just find people that you really trust, and they become sort of your trusted network of resources to be able to say, hey, who's doing that for you, or who's doing that for you, et cetera. So if you're new to it, or if you're trying to figure out something new that you don't have a network for, that's, there's resources available for that. But then, for us particularly, it's the classic. We know a guy, right? I
Yeah.
know a guy, right? So there's that aspect.
Robert, I quickly just want to ask you, because I know you need to go.
Yeah.
Just finally, if you could give any aspiring podcaster a piece of advice, as they move forward, or something that you wish that you had heard when you first started out, what would it be?
It would be three things. One, have faith and be in it don't plan 3 episodes, plan 12. And do them. And if you have to do all of them and then launch, do that. But if you're thinking we'll start a podcast and we'll see how it goes over a couple of episodes, don't do it. So plan out a season, or plan out at least a quarter's worth of content. Shoot it all, get it all done, get it cut up, and then launch your podcast first. Or if you're a new show, just commit to doing it. Commit to doing it every week for at least 12 to 20 episodes before you call yourself a podcaster. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is don't wing it. Don't just plan it. Every episode, put the care and feeding into it, care about it, have that self-awareness to actually understand who's the right host, what's the right structure of the show, scripting out the show. Don't be afraid to cut it up. Don't be afraid to cut out the bad bits. And lastly, I would say, know that you're not going to build a huge audience. Know that it is about intimacy with your audience, not the breadth of your audience. Podcasting, you will be surprised at how many people come up to you after the 40th or 50th show. And I'm sure you've had this happen to you, where it's like, I feel like I know you. I feel like I know you much better and have a deeper understanding of you because I listen to you in my ear every week. That's what podcasting's power really is the power of the voice in your listener's ear.
100%. That is fantastic advice. Robert, again, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it.
100% my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And that's a wrap on our conversation with Robert Rose on what makes a great podcast in 2024. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell button to stay updated with all of our conversations with thought leaders on the DesignRush podcast. Looking for an expert agency to partner with for your next project? Then look no further than designrush.com/marketplace. Our carefully curated selection of agencies are ready to breathe life into your next project, be it your next web design, marketing, graphic design project, and everything in between. Again, I'm your host, Bianca Mayer. Stay curious and join us for the next episode.